I've heard that it is agony.
Oh God. This week on Unsolved, we take a look into the Texarkana Phantom Killer.
I love it.
Florida Machete Murder.
It sounds wild.
The murder of Bugsy Siegel. Death of Vincent Van Gogh, thought to be murder.
Pop.
Okay,
See?
Jesus.
That easy. Okay, let's do it.
This week on BuzzFeed Unsolved, we take a look into the Florida Machete Murder of Athalia Ponsell Lindsley in our continuing exploration into why Florida is the way that it is.
It is a unique place with some funny stories coming out of it.
They have the magical world of Harry Potter. Or is it the Wizarding World?
What about Miami Beach, baby?
Yeah, sure. Miami Beach.
Never
great.
been.
Yeah, you don't seem like a Miami Beach type.
No.
Anyways, we're here to talk about a machete murder. And also, we have talked about Florida in the past. We investigated that lady who exploded in her living room.
I loved that lady.
You did?
I mean, I didn't know
You did
her.
love
It
the
was a
fact
good
that
story.
her head was the size of a tiny little teaspoon, or a teacup. Anyways, let's get into it. Born into a life of privilege, Athalia Ponsell Lindsley was a former Broadway actress, model, inventor, real estate agent, and author. She was, according to her detractors and the Orlando Sentinel, a sharp-tongued, aggressive woman who, quote, would not have won any popularity contest, end quote. Indeed, in 1970, Athalia ran for Florida legislature and lost.
I feel like a mark of true success is when you have detractors. That's a wonderful thing.
Oh, like when you get haters?
Oh, yeah.
That's like the old way to say that.
Yeah. I would love some haters.
Yeah, I'd love some haters too.
Why don't you take a long walk down a short pier?
I like it.
yeah.
No, that's too general
Safe.
and too hypothetical. I like when it gets pointed, like, oh, I hate his stupid beady eyes.
Or like your
and
little rooster,
Yeah,
your
look
little
at
rooster
look at his
hair
little
up there.
look at that little surf wave on his head. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna get my little boogie board and surf that in the morning. In 1973, Athalia married James Lindsley, a real estate agent and the former mayor of St. Augustine, Florida, where Athalia lived at the time. While they were married in September, by the next January, the two still lived in separate homes. Athalia was trying to sell the house she was living in and didn't want to leave it unoccupied before moving to her new husband's home. She never got the opportunity. Now, it is funny that they are both real estate agents and they cannot sell their house.
You know.
Maybe they're just not that good at their jobs, or maybe, just maybe, no one wants to live in Florida. I'm just imagining a bunch of people going, you need to buy a house here? It's like, I'm a real estate agent too. Do you want to buy a house here? And there's just a big feedback loop. It's, you want to buy a house here? Oh,
It's
I'm
real
selling.
estate agents selling real estate to other
Real estate, and like, I know you're ripping me off, but I already have a house. On January 23rd, 1974, between 6 and 6:15 p.m., the 56-year-old Athalia went outside to walk her pet blue jay, Clementine.
That is cool.
She's taking her bird for a walk.
I love that. I had a wonderful little bird, I understand.
We all know you kept your bird in a freezer for 2 years.
The ground was hard, we couldn't bury him yet.
For 2 years.
No, it wasn't 2 years, it was just over the harsh Chicago winter, and when the ground thawed, we buried him in the garden.
We all know you ate that bird. We
You
all know
can't
it.
eat a parrot.
You did. Tell me
I
how you
didn't
did
eat
it.
a parrot. I loved him. I'm done talking about my parrot. I'm not entertaining this bit. Because I love that little bird.
On her porch, she encountered a man wielding a machete who proceeded to hack her to death. By the time police arrived, Athalia had been nearly decapitated. Police Chief Virgil Stewart said, quote, she was dead when we got there. She had been badly butchered. Her head was almost cut off, end quote. Clementine, the blue jay, was never seen again.
Do you think this person maybe was Clementine's original owner and just wanted the bird back?
I did not consider that possibility. It's actually not even in my theories.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time you've glossed over things.
Well, I do think it's a bit of a jump to say, hey, that's my parrot. I think your head doesn't look good on your shoulders anymore.
Yeah, so we know you're not one to jump to conclusions.
I don't jump
or
to conclusions.
Shoddy theories.
Only if I have some facts behind it, big boy.
Take it away.
A neighbor, 19-year-old Locke McCormick, said he could hear Athalia's screams from his house. When he went to check on Athalia, he discovered her butchered body. He told police he saw a 40 to 60-year-old man wearing a white shirt and dark pants walking away from the house. A witness reported that there was blood in the grass, quote, leading all around the south side of the house, end quote. At one point, a police officer ordered the ambulance attendants to hose down the blood.
Does that fly in the face of like crime scene investigation? Or just hose everything down? Maybe.
Let's get this evidence out of here. All right, now I could think clearly. The sheriff offered a $500 reward to anyone with information on the case. On February 17, 1974, a county mechanic named Dewey Lee said he'd searched the marshes 1 mile from Lindsley's home and discovered a machete and a package containing a bloodied white shirt, dark pants, a watch, and a pair of shoes. After Athalia's death, Frances Bemis, a 70-year-old retired department store public relations exec and fashion consultant, told her friends that she knew something about the murder. Bemis, who was reportedly a friend of Athalia's, was even said to have been collaborating with a writer on a book about Athalia after her death. She did not seem afraid when Athalia turned up slain, telling the St. Augustine Record, quote, "I think St. Augustine is the safest place I have ever lived. I go out walking at night and will continue to do so. I went out walking the same night that the murder took place," end quote.
I don't know what I'd make of that. If this grisly murder had occurred and a woman just proudly proclaimed like, well, I'm not afraid. Maybe if she knew her well, it's her way of saying like, well, she must have been into something dirty, baby. Because that kind of stuff doesn't happen around here. And let me show you.
I'm gonna go on a walk right now.
Yeah.
Frances indeed continued to go walking at night, including on November 3rd, 1974, a little over 9 months after Athalia was murdered. The next day, not far from where Athalia was murdered, a man walking his dog found Frances dead in a vacant lot.
Oh no! What?
That's unfortunately the old picture wrap on Frances Bemis.
Oh, well, you know, she died doing what she loved.
She did die doing what she loved.
And look, if you're an old lady and this killer has already killed an old lady with something as simple as a machete, this is not the Zodiac. It's not someone who's, you know, pulling a lot of strings and putting a lot of production design into their work. It's just walking up to someone with a machete and just being like, ah!
On the flip side of that too, like
don't challenge that.
Who are you also like making yourself a big man out to be?
Yeah.
Like you murdered an old lady with a machete? That's crazy. Wow, you must be really dangerous, man. It's not like he murdered Macho Man Randy Savage out there. That'd
be a feat.
It's an old lady.
Yeah.
So good for him, I guess. She had apparently been clobbered repeatedly with a stone block. She was semi-nude, with most of her clothes having been ripped off, though an autopsy report found no indication of rape. An account by the New York Daily News noted that her body had been burned, as though a killer had tried to destroy the corpse. Another thing about this one is the attempt to destroy the evidence, destroy the body by burning it.
Yeah.
And then him going, didn't work. All right.
I guess I'll just leave it here.
I'll just leave it.
I guess there'll just be evidence.
Well, we already know what they do with evidence. Hose it off.
Yeah, they didn't give a shit last time, so.
Police Chief Virgil Stewart did not believe there was a connection between Frances and Athalia's murders at the time. With 2 women violently dead in St. Augustine, Florida in 1974, it's time to dive into the theories. The first theory is that Athalia's husband, James Lindsley, was responsible for her murder. James was an easygoing real estate agent who had served 2 terms as mayor of St. Augustine. Though they lived in separate homes, James said they did not have marital problems. Athalia, however, had sent letters to her sister showing they were having issues. Quote, "Jimmy is a complete leech, a complete liar," end quote, she wrote in one letter. She also said she changed the locks of her house. There was also gossip among community members that the crime scene was hosed down to protect James's involvement. According to Elizabeth Randall, author of a book detailing Athalia's murder, James complained about how many rumors flew around the town.
Florida seems like a gossipy state.
Yeah.
Oh, what else are you gonna do there?
You're trapped by swamp and gators.
Yeah.
You're essentially just left to your own devices. Yeah, why don't you just spread some funny rumors?
Whisper storm, baby.
Maybe rumors that are rumors, like you eating that bird.
If you don't stop this bit, I'm gonna...
You gonna cut my head off with a machete?
I didn't say that.
In testimony at Athalia's murder trial, though interestingly not a trial prosecuting James, more on that in a bit, James told the jury that he owned a machete resembling the one used to kill his wife. He usually kept it in the trunk of his car, using it to hack at undergrowth while looking at properties for his real estate job. After Athalia's murder, he turned the machete over to police. At that time, it was common for residents in the county to own 1 or 2 machetes used to fight back against the Florida fauna. At the trial, James was shown the machete that was used on his wife. James could not confirm whether it was his, telling the judge, quote, "All machetes look alike to me," end quote. I think it's important to say that because I imagine people who are watching this, they were imagining Jason Voorhees murdering this lady.
Yeah.
But in reality, everyone had a machete, so it could have been Jim from down the street.
You go to the church on Sunday, the priest is standing up there with machete.
He's using it as a pointer.
Yeah.
They're using it
throwing holy water at people.
They're using it to point out items on PowerPoint presentations. Everyone has a machete.
Yeah, it makes sense.
According to Randall's book, there was a gap of around 15 to 25 minutes in James's alibi. It supposedly occurred between the time James drove home from the grocery store where he had been shopping with Athalia and the time he drove back to his own home. Randall posits that James had enough time to drive to Athalia's house during that period.
Unfortunate that if you just have like a 20-minute gap in your schedule where no one sees you, suddenly you're open to be a murderer.
Yeah, that is true. It takes me about 20 minutes to cook my dinner usually. And because of that, I'm a murderer.
You're a murderer.
The second theory is Athalia's neighbor, Alan Stanford, murdered her in the culmination of a months-long feud. According to the New York Daily News, Athalia loved animals and took many in, including noisy dogs and even, at one point, a goat. The noise from these critters often disgruntled her neighbors. According to author Elizabeth Randall, both of Athalia's neighbors, the Stanfords and the McCormicks, filed public complaints about the noise in 1972, resulting in a $50 fine for disturbing the peace. Randall then describes an escalating neighborly feud in which Athalia outraged the Stanfords by cutting back their trees that extended over her property line. According to Randall, Athalia also planted bamboo across a city easement at the corner of the Stanford driveway, which the Stanfords had the city remove. At the time, Stanford was the manager of St. Johns County, of which St. Augustine is the county seat. Athalia had apparently suggested to the county commission that Stanford wasn't qualified for his job, appearing at least 4 times before the commission to complain about him.
That's a strained relationship.
That is. Yeah,
you don't want to be that way to your neighbors.
Yeah, you don't want to have a petting zoo in your house.
The thing about cutting down their tree on her property, that's fine.
So you would do that?
Legally, you're allowed to.
That is
if there's hangovers, you can lop those.
I did have a neighbor who had an overhang of like a lime tree, and it was great because I could go pick a little lime.
Did you ever think about killing your neighbor?
When he didn't give me limes, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Athalia would claim that Stanford had neglected his duties of maintaining and building roads, but her complaints also verged into the personal. Randall describes a commission meeting where Athalia publicly accused Stanford of putting sugar in her Cadillac's gas tank. More saliently, she also said on October 9th, 1974, that Stanford threatened her, saying, quote, "That man threatened my life. He threatened to kill me," end quote.
Sure, he seems fishy. But it also seems incredibly risky to murder your neighbor.
Especially after all of this has been public. She has, in public, 4 times complained that he's not good at his job.
Yeah.
Every human's capable of murder if you push them enough. I just don't know if this is enough of a push.
Okay.
It's true.
Is that so?
Yeah. Oh. I bet you would murder me if I pushed you enough.
Yeah, probably.
According to Randall, mere hours before Athalia's murder, Stanford had been visited by the Florida Department of Professional and Occupational Regulations at Athalia's request. Randall says they were investigating to see whether Stanford was in violation of Florida state statutes.
Yeah, that's a little fuel to the fire there.
I don't know if it's enough to push him over the edge.
It's certainly not good.
It's not good. It doesn't look great, but I still wonder.
But then when people start showing up to evaluate you.
Yeah, that is true.
You might lose it.
Yeah, I guess you can't really tattle on her. Like, she's doing this, make her stop.
Yeah.
When Locke McCormick first heard Athalia's screams, he looked to her home and told his grandmother, quote, "Mr. Stanford is hitting Miss Ponsell," end quote, which was Athalia's maiden name. McCormick later explained that he'd assumed it was Stanford based on his clothing and the fact that the man was walking back towards Stanford's house, but he didn't see the man's face or really know if it was him. The police also noted a blood trail that cut across her driveway to a concrete wall that demarcated the divide between her property and Stanford's.
Well, that's all not looking great.
That doesn't look good. Okay, and that's a little bit more than hearsay at that point.
Yeah. Actually, this makes me wonder. Let's say you want to murder someone. Would it make sense to study them for a long time, see who's in their life, and then sort of try to disguise yourself or make it look like you're a different acquaintance of theirs? So if I want this lady dead, and I'm like, she's got a feud going on with her neighbor.
With the Stanford
Right
guy.
over there, he tends to wear these kind of things.
I'll put those on.
I'll put those on. Dress up like him, thwack-a-thwack, run through his yard.
Yeah, just roll around in the grass on his front lawn.
Get that blood all around there.
Of course, they're going to hose it off, but
It is Florida, so they're going to hose it.
make sure that blood's really in the grass.
Yeah. It's close to a perfect crime, maybe. But it's certainly giving you an edge as a murderer.
That is true. The sheriff took McCormick to a hypnotist in the hopes of unlocking further memories, but the results were inconclusive. That sounds about par for the course for investigative methods in Florida.
What do we got? How's the evidence looking? Well, we hosed it all down. Okay.
What do you want next?
A hypnotist?
Bring me a metronome. Recall Dewey Lee had discovered a package of evidence, including a bloody shirt and a watch. While the shirt had been sitting in salt water and mud for too long to determine conclusively if the blood on the shirt was Athalia's blood type, a forensic expert was able to identify a laundry mark as Stanford's name. Ultimately, however, it was decided the mark was too faint and garbled to be conclusive.
It just seems like this guy murdered this
It really
lady,
does.
To me.
Is it
personally.
maybe the fact that the name on the laundry that was found that was bloodied was his? Is that what it is?
I just know none of my laundry's laying out there. One, I don't have my name on my laundry.
Yeah, what is it?
But this is the 70s, maybe things were different.
I don't know. Or he's Andy from Toy Story. He just writes his name on everything.
Yeah. And two, I don't think any articles of my clothing are covered in blood.
But no matter what crime comes up, Shane has no bloody clothing at all.
I don't.
Not even a nosebleed?
I was in a church once. It happened in a church once.
Oh my.
I don't go to church. I was just with one of my friends and he was like, you want to go to church? And I was like, all right, man. I was like 9.
So you're telling me at 9 years old you don't go to church. The first time you cross the threshold into holy ground, blood expels from your nostrils.
Yeah. They ran out of tissues. Mopping that up. It was wild.
It sounds wild. More damning for Stanford was the watch, which a jeweler identified as Stanford's. Stanford claimed that after the murder, he had discovered his watch was missing. Stanford was indicted for the murder. His friends and fellow church members raised $20,000 for his bail and an estimated $250,000 defense fund, which would have the same buying power of more than $1.3 million today. As a quick side note, at the time of Francis Bemis's murder, Stanford was out on bail. With the money raised by his friends, Stanford mounted a formidable defense. Stanford's defense posited that Sheriff Dudley Garrett, Dewey Lee, and Athalia's husband James Lindsley had all worked together to frame Stanford. Quote, "Isn't it strange that all the deputies and trained police officers didn't know what to look for or where to look for it? And without stopping, Lee went right to the spot, walked up to the bank, and there it was. I submit to you that Dewey Lee put it out there that morning." End quote. The defense posited Dewey Lee as a scammer. While he was on the stand, a defense attorney asked Dewey, quote, "Isn't it a fact that you were looking for a spot where nobody could see you put that stuff in the swamp?" End quote. It does seem like they're desperately grasping at straws.
Yeah, because if you were trying to frame someone, you would want it to look that. I mean, you'd go overboard.
Yeah.
You'd probably try a little too hard and make it a little too obvious looking.
This is confusing. I got a feeling it's gonna end up unsolved.
We'll see.
Key to the defense was the testimony of one Adele McLaughlin, a data processing clerk and neighbor who was riding her bike past Athalia's home at the time. Adele testified that she had seen Dewey in Athalia's yard less than 2 hours before the murder took place. After 2.5 hours of deliberation on February 3rd, 1975, the jury declared Stanford innocent. Afterward, Sheriff Garrett told reporters, quote, "Yes, I think Stanford did it. I signed the complaint against him, and I don't concur with the verdict," end quote. There is something weird to be said about a town believing so much that this man did not do it that they literally raised $250,000 and only deliberated in the jury for 2.5 hours before saying, yeah, he didn't do it.
If I murdered someone and the entire town was like, no, he didn't.
He couldn't.
I'd be like, this rules.
He earned enough goodwill tickets to cash it in for that
It's
prize
like a punch
of
card.
murder.
Like, I've been a great guy my entire life, and then you get that 10th punch, and it's like, all right,
Here's your free
here's
murder.
your machete.
Here's your machete. Have fun murdering. You get a free one.
In 1974, in a span of less than 10 months, 2 women were violently murdered by hand in the same Florida community. The person responsible for either or even both deaths is a mystery. Could it have been a disgruntled husband, a fed-up neighbor, a scheming mechanic, or someone else entirely? The answer remains unsolved.
I think it was the neighbor. Look, I'm a simple man. I see a trail of blood going to someone's house. Even if they didn't do it, come on, you're going to jail.
I think it might have been a random person.
All right.
It just seems too obvious.
Okay.
There's a paper trail of their feud. Why the hell would he be that dumb?
Rage, you know, lust, rage, just building up, bursting out.
Well, I've never really gotten that angry. I don't really have that capacity.
It's building inside you. Everyone sees it. We all
That's
see
great. Oh man, I can't wait for Krakatoa then.
I shudder.
Hope no one's in the way.
Scary.
This week on BuzzFeed Unsolved, we take a look into the Texarkana Phantom Killer, a case that has been referred to as, quote, the #1 unsolved murder case in Texas history, end quote.
#1, baby.
Yeah.
I love it.
I don't think they have like a big board in the Texas police station where they,
Do you think they vote?
oh, it seems all relative, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But they seem pretty resolute about this guy being at the top of the heap.
And it's a rowdy town, you'll see that.
Is it really?
It's a rowdy town.
You been there?
No, I haven't been there, but I read it's a rowdy town.
Fun to read about a rowdy town.
A rowdy town with 2 rowdy boys. Let's get into it.
On February 22nd, 1946, in the Texas-Arkansas border town appropriately named Texarkana, Jimmy Hollis, 25, and Mary Jean Larry, 19, went on a date to the movies and began driving back to Mary Jean's home. On the way, they stopped their car on a quiet, unpaved road about 100 yards away from some houses in a residential neighborhood.
That's what I like
There
to
you go.
hear. Yeah, you know what they're doing.
How many?
Here we go, wait, yeah.
So wait, in this
Is this
scenario,
still funny?
In this scenario,
it's
where
2019. When did this bit start? God, this had to be like caveman times.
you think like a Neanderthal looked at his other Neanderthal pals and went,
Yeah, probably. It's one of the world's greatest bits. I feel like people don't do it enough nowadays because we take it for granted. Spread that around this year. You know, if you see your 2 friends and you think maybe they've been smooching behind your back, be like, I know what you guys are up to a little.
I actually don't think your angle's catching it. I think we can still see your face a little bit, so you might have to turn.
Is this?
Like that. If I turn,
It's like we're both making out.
After about 10 minutes, a man walked up. As Mary Jean would later relate, quote, he wore a white mask over his head with cutout places for his eyes and mouth. He pointed a flashlight and pistol at us. He came up on the driver's side of the car and told Jimmy something like this, I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say. End quote. Both Jimmy and Mary Jean got out of the car. The assailant made Jimmy take off his pants, then hit him twice over the head, cracking Jimmy's skull and knocking him unconscious. The attacker then tried to sexually assault and rob Mary Jean.
Oh, okay, it did, yeah, it was good. It got a little rough.
yeah, it's a little rough.
Interesting that he would go through the theatrics of wearing a mask.
Yeah, anytime someone wears a mask and it's a serial killer situation, you wonder, did they intend to maybe let them go? Because the only reason why you're wearing a mask is so that they can't then identify you later.
Yeah, oh, that's true.
If a killer approached me and he had a mask on, I would feel a little bit better about my chances of surviving. Because if he walks up with a gun and you could just see his face, like I could see it's your face, I know that's probably the last thing I'm gonna see. And right now I actually thought of staring into those dead cold eyes. And if that's the last thing I see on this earth, I made some mistakes along the way.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Mary Jean pleaded with the attacker, telling him they didn't have any money. The attacker hit Mary Jean, knocking her to the ground. When she got up, the man told her to run. Mary Jean took off down the road, but was wearing high heels. The assailant quickly overtook her and hit her again, knocking her to the ground, where he began to abuse her. At this point, Jimmy struggled to his feet and managed to stop a passing car. It's thought the assailant saw the car lights and fled from Mary Jean. Both Jimmy and Mary Jean received medical treatment. Jimmy spent over 12 days recovering in the hospital.
This guy did literally get his skull cracked and still was able to get up and flag down another car, which then saved their lives.
Yeah.
Good for Jimmy.
I mean, it could just be like a fracture, right? I don't know how skulls really work.
From what I read, it was a
Pretty bad?
pretty severe crack. From the description, she thought that he had shot him. That's how loud the cracking noise was, which is not good.
So, 0 for 2.
Yeah, 0 for 2. But this, as you'll see, would be just the first of his attacks.
In the mid-40s, Texarkana was a relatively violent place. Killings, robberies, and other crimes were very common. It might make sense then, while the attack on Jimmy and Mary Jean was brutal, the community didn't pay it much attention until another attack occurred a month later. This one fatal.
Yeah, I mean, it must be an upsetting place if a masked man trying to assault 2 people is just passing news.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, did you hear about that, the masked phantom who tried to murder 2 people? Oh, yeah. Hey, let's go get a soda pop.
On the morning of March 24th, authorities found the bodies of 29-year-old Richard L. Griffin and 17-year-old Polly Ann Moore in a 1941 Oldsmobile on what was then known as a lover's lane. Both had been shot in the back of the head. Richard was found between the 2 front seats on his knees, with his head in his hands. His pants pockets were inside out, thought to be the result of someone trying to rob him. Polly Ann was discovered face down in the back seat of the car, though there was evidence that suggested she may have been murdered on a blanket outside the car and placed there later. The couple had last been seen around 10 p.m. the night before, eating dinner with Richard's sister. They had been shot with what was thought to have been a Colt .32 caliber pistol, and any footprints that would have been around the car had been washed away throughout the day.
We gotta give kids places to make out.
That's unfortunately, most of these serial killer cases happen in a lover's lane scenario.
That's what I'm saying. We gotta give them a well-lit area that is central to a town's location.
Maybe some water, vending machines nearby.
Oh yeah, some soda pops, some sprees, whatever, you know? Just a place with a bunch of, well, probably don't want to bring hammocks into the equation because smooching might elevate, but...
That is true. Also, a hammock would be really hard to escape if a serial killer did come up to you while you were smooching in a hammock.
Sure.
It's impossible.
It's just a murder bag.
You're trapped in a little net. You're like in a little spider net.
Though there weren't many clues for authorities to go off of, 3 days after the killings, at least 50 people had been asked about the murder, and over 100 false leads had been investigated. While this attack, ending in the murder of a young couple, turned more heads than the first assault, the community still believed these events to be isolated incidents. 3 weeks later, their indifference would change into a frenzy of fear. On April 14th, authorities found the bodies of 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker and 16-year-old Paul Martin. The previous night, the 2 teens had attended a band performance at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Club, where Betty Jo played alto saxophone. They were also seen leaving the dance around 1:30 in the morning. Paul had been shot 4 times and was discovered in a rural area on North Park Road. Betty Jo had been raped and shot twice. Her body was found up in the woods about a mile away.
So escalating, getting worse.
Getting worse, he's getting a little more bold. One thing you can note though, because you always see the trends of these serial killers, all of these were couples.
Interesting.
Both had been shot with a .32 caliber Colt, the same weapon thought to be used in the previous attack. This being the 3rd attack in less than 2 months, now with 4 young people dead, the community was finally paying attention, and they were panicked. When their husbands and fathers were away for work, women and children would move into the aptly named Hotel Grimm in downtown Texarkana.
Sort of like a staycation.
No, it's not like a staycation. It's more like people around us are getting murdered. Let's all huddle together under the roof of a place named the Hotel Grimm.
Well, clearly it's a popular establishment, and if everybody trusts them, they're going there as a place of refuge.
I suppose.
Maybe stop being so judgy of these.
The thing is, maybe I just don't have the insight that you have, because this town, as I said, was a rowdy town. They even called it Little Chicago. And as we all know, That's where you hail from.
I hail from Big Chicago.
Murder Town, USA.
Okay, well, there's some big issues there.
Others bought guns and crafted homemade security systems from kitchenware and wire around their homes. Typically bustling streets went quiet. The Texarkana Gazette named the attacker the Phantom Killer.
And it doesn't help that the press named him the Phantom Killer. They gave him a nickname. If you give someone a nickname, it's a compliment. We should never be doing that for the serial killer.
Don't puff him up.
Because he probably read that in the paper next day and was like, that's got a ring to it. I'm gonna get some business cards printed.
Yeah.
Tillman Johnson, one of the lead investigators, said, quote, "We were constantly getting calls, mostly at night, about prowlers. People would call about any noise they heard at all," end quote. Everyone was afraid they would be the next victim of the Phantom Killer.
Seems like a little bit of a stretch for really any Texan in the 1940s to say, you know what, I think I might need to buy a gun.
It is also fun that they're setting little Kevin McAllister booby traps around
Love
the house.
that. I think people perhaps undervalue booby traps.
I don't think they're that practical in real life.
They could be if you do it well.
Who are you trying to booby trap on a regular basis? Your cat? Your sweet Obie?
He's a sweet boy.
You trying to booby trap that cat?
No, I don't. I want to do the opposite. I want to booby hug him.
Booby hug him.
I don't know what the term is.
It's
Whatever the
definitely
opposite
not
of a
that.
booby trap is.
I'll tell you the term
I want to
is
lay
not-
down a path of rose petals, Come this way, sir.
I tell you what.
You're a sweet boy with a fuzzy face. I'll give you a little hug.
On May 3rd, 37-year-old farmer Virgil Starks was listening to the radio when a .22 caliber round tore through his front porch window and hit him. His wife Katie left their bedroom to find Virgil bleeding in the living room. Katie went to call for help when the attacker shot her twice in the face. The bullets knocked some of her teeth out, but she survived. Ducking to avoid more shots, she made her way back to the bedroom. As the attacker tried to break in through the kitchen window, Katie escaped out the front door, with a bullet stuck under her tongue and trailing blood behind her. Katie made it to a nearby farmhouse, where she was taken to the hospital and survived. Virgil, however, died.
I don't like any mouth teeth stuff. Don't like it.
No, like when people get in fights and you can kind of see like the teeth coming like, and they're falling out of their mouth.
I've got big issues with teeth, even if I'm sitting with someone who is taking a fork and eating and it scrapes against their teeth.
Oh yeah, I don't like that either, or a drill. We're also kind of lightly glossing over the fact that she got shot in the face twice.
Yeah, that's worse than a fork scraping.
An indication of the fear the Phantom Killer had instilled in the community. 20 to 30 police officers converged on the Starks farmhouse. Police tried to gather evidence and interview possible suspects and witnesses. According to Johnson, quote, "People would stand out near the front of their homes and yell at you to identify yourself before you got too close. You had to identify yourself or you would get shot," end quote.
Fair.
So yeah, we're on high alert here.
Yeah.
If this was me, I'd have a double barrel shotgun pointed directly at the door at all times.
You'd probably have to have shifts, because I'd want someone out there at night too.
I'm staying up day and night. I don't sleep.
Well, then now you're setting yourself up that's vulnerable because you're going to fall asleep.
Maybe I'll take a nap.
Yeah, take a nap.
I'll take a nap and then
Hey, I'll
let's do
tag in.
shifts. You're right.
Yeah.
Shifts are right. Shifts are good. I wanted to be. I've never even shot a gun, so
You've never shot a gun?
no,
You don't have to.
I don't think I have to.
Authorities followed bloody footprints left by the killer that went from the house across the highway, where they eventually lost the trail. While this incident exacerbated the fear of the Phantom Killer, it's possible this killing was done by someone else. The other attacks had targeted people younger than the Starks and had taken place in cars, not homes. In addition, Virgil was shot with a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol, a different weapon than the .32 caliber used in the previous murders of Betty Jo and Paul. Still, this incident was included in the Phantom investigation as panic swept the area. Authorities took to dressing as young couples in an effort to lure the murderer, but it appeared the Phantom was done. 2 months later, with no more Phantom murders, the community's fear began to decrease, and life started to get back to normal. No one was ever found guilty of the murders.
Backtrack just a bit.
About the dressing up?
Exactly right.
Yeah, I thought so.
I'm imagining an old Texan man with a large bushy mustache. I guess like a chubby Sam Elliott, a cop hat on, a white t-shirt, pack of cigarettes rolled up in it.
You're imagining a clearly adult, burly police officer
Exactly
trying to
right.
look like a 16-year-old boy.
100%.
And it's hilarious.
Yes. And next to him, also an adult male.
With a big old mustache and
sort
a
of
wig
like-
on.
Sort of like maybe
Yeah.
pretending to make out. Or maybe actually making out.
Or
like,
pre-recorded noises of smooching noises.
Oh, like a Ferris Bueller situation. Just sort of
That's like cartoon kissing. No one sounds like that when they're kissing. With that, it's time to look into possible theories behind the Texarkana Phantom Murders, of which there are basically only two. The first theory is H.B. Duty Tennyson, a college student who confessed to some of the killings in a note left behind after he killed himself. According to a newspaper from the day of his death, a sheriff reportedly said the note read, quote, "Why did I take my own life? Well, when you committed 2 double murders, you would too. Yes, I did kill Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin in the city park that night, and killed Mr. Stark and tried to get Mrs. Stark," end quote. According to Duty's cousin, forensic psychiatrist Dr. John Tennyson, Duty had connections to all of the victims. He was allegedly an usher at the theater where some victims of the attacks had seen movies before their deaths, and had been in the same high school band as Betty Jo. According to Dr. Tennyson, one of Duty's friends lived under the same roof as the sister of Katie Starks.
All right.
So he had some connections to some of the victims. But I will note that the sources when it came to that note in particular were shaky at best.
It was just him. Why do they save these things? Why is this hearsay?
People want to have,
Answer me.
it's like that. People in the public want answers. There's this horrible thing happening in their town. They look to the authorities for answers, and if they don't have them, there's outrage. So you need to have something to say.
Interesting.
So as a result, maybe some shoddy reporting.
But it is fairly convenient that he has all these connections to them. And
It is. He's a very interesting suspect for sure. But for me, because there's that note and these connections, and yet he still wasn't indicted for the crimes, there must have been something that ruled him out outright.
yeah.
Our other theory is 29-year-old Uel Lee Swinney. Around the time of the attacks, Arkansas State Trooper Max Tackett observed that cars were reported stolen and later found abandoned whenever the Phantom Killer made an attack. Following this lead led police to stake out a downtown parking lot on June 28, 1946, where a stolen car was abandoned. This led to the arrest of 21-year-old Peggy Swinney, the new wife of one Uel Lee Swinney. While in custody, Peggy gave many detailed statements explaining how her husband committed the murders of Betty Jo and Paul, though descriptions of her own involvement varied from statement to statement. On July 23rd, Peggy gave a statement saying that on April 13th, the day before the bodies of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin were found, she and Uel parked at Spring Lake Park and drank some beers. According to her statement, Uel left the car saying he had to, quote, take a leak, end quote. Peggy said, quote, he was gone from the car about 1 hour when I heard something that sounded like 2 gunshots. It was just getting daylight when he came back to the car and started driving out of the park at a rapid rate of speed. When he came back to the car, I saw that his clothes were wet up to his knees and damp on up to his waist, end quote. She says that her boyfriend steps out of the car to go pee, and then he takes a long time, comes back, and when he comes back, he's very rushed.
He's heard gunshots.
She's heard gunshots. He's driving very fast. He's wet, not because of the pee, I imagine because he
went through a creek or something?
It's near a lake, so.
It's near a lake. Washing off the blood? She does seem to have a fair amount of details.
She does, and there's one detail that she has that is very interesting that she knows, and we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
On July 24th, Peggy gave another statement. In this one, she said Uel had said, quote, he was going out to the park to rob someone, end quote. Peggy said she went with Uel to Paul Martin's car, where Uel pointed a gun at the young couple and told them to get out of the car. Peggy said that she refused to search the teenagers, which angered Uel, and he shot Martin twice. Peggy then allegedly held Betty Jo in place while Uel got his car. He drove it back, made both girls get into the car, drove west, turned around, and shot Paul 2 more times, as he had apparently been able to get up and move after the first 2 shots. He took Betty Jo into the woods while Peggy waited in the car. When Uel returned, he told Peggy he had tried to, quote, get some, end quote, with a young girl, and then shot her after she refused.
Wait, so this is the same attack, but a different story?
So she gave multiple statements about this day that they were at the lake. One version, she says he left and came back. This version, she says,
she was well involved with
she
all
was
this.
somewhat involved, and she said that he was going to go rob these people.
I see.
While Peggy's story shifted, she crucially told police information that only someone who had been at the scene of the crime would have known. For instance, Peggy mentioned how Paul's date book was thrown into some bushes, a fact that only Bowie County Sheriff W.H. Bill Presley knew at the time, as he had been the one who'd found the book.
So it sounds like she knows what she's talking about.
Okay, so there's two scenarios, right? She was there when the murder happened, or
she happened upon it.
She happened upon it while they were at the lake, found these bodies, saw that there was that in the bush, and then ran away, and then realized later, maybe they'll find out I was there.
Yeah.
But I will say that if scenario 2 was true, it does not make a bit of sense for her to be like, yeah, we decided we were gonna rob them.
Oh, they might find out I was there. I know what, I'll tell them we killed him. That doesn't make any sense.
I know, I'll tell them he killed them, and I thought about a robbery.
And I just kind of was
But
there.
I wasn't down.
Ewell was arrested at the Arkansas Motor Coach bus station as he arrived back from Atlanta, where he had attempted to sell a stolen car. While his wife was willing to talk to investigators, Ewell was not. Critically, while Peggy did give statements to investigators, she could not be forced to testify against Ewell, as they had gotten married mere hours before police arrested her.
I'm having a hard time taking a temperature on these two. Do they love each other?
I don't know,
Clearly
man.
not, because she's,
ratting him out, but that also could be self-preservation. She could have been involved.
do they get off on this?
That's what I was saying, like a weird Bonnie and Clyde.
But Bonnie and Clyde stuck together. Bonnie wasn't like, hey, you gotta check out this Clyde guy.
Ewell was taken to Little Rock for a truth serum shot, but he was given too much, which caused him to pass out. Investigator Tillman Johnson said, quote, I think that if we had just kept him here in Texarkana and kept questioning him, we would have gotten the truth out of him eventually, end quote.
Or the truth serum's not real.
Yeah, I mean, we've come across this very elusive
Not a real
truth
thing.
serum.
We've looked it up.
In most of these cases, I mean, whatever it is, apparently you could overdose on it. You could take too much truth serum, too much serum.
Too much serum, man. Oh.
Yeah.
So you're bringing in this quack doctor who's like,
he's
he's not telling the truth, give him more.
Hey, let me inject him with my lemon juice cocktail. I'll tell him, make him.
Looking pretty woozy, Doc.
Peggy was imprisoned for her own involvement in the car theft, but eventually released. Ewell was sentenced to life in state prison for being a habitual criminal after the auto theft charge, but was released on parole in 1973 when the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals decided that he didn't have adequate representation on a car theft charge from 1941. Ewell died in a nursing home in Dallas in 1994.
Crazy to think you can kill 5 people in the 1940s and then live long enough to see Jurassic Park in theaters.
Thank you for that.
Discuss some other things.
Thank you
but
for that colorful
It's
perspective.
just crazy. I'm just trying to put into perspective the fact that this man so long ago committed these crimes and
then he
so
saw
far into the future.
and he saw the rise of industrial light and magic.
ILM. They're wizards.
Yeah, I don't really know how to wrap this one up because it's just kind of upsetting because I feel like this man got away with it.
Or the other guy. Gotta say that.
Or the other guy.
But it does seem like this guy.
The Texarkana Phantom Murder stand out as managing to stoke a frenzy of fear in a community that had been numbed to violent crime. As W.E. Atchison, a resident of the area who was 16 at the time of the attack, said, quote, the big wonder for everyone back then was whether the killings were being done by someone who lived among us, and I still wonder who did it, end quote. Across 4 attacks, 5 people were shot to death, and 3 others were severely injured. As for who was responsible, that remains unsolved.
I will say that since the time of the murders, the town really has leaned into it. The movie that was made about this was called The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
I've heard of that. I didn't realize that was about that. I've never seen it, but the
Yeah, that's about the Texarkana Phantom Killer.
Dang.
Well, I don't really know how to wrap this one up because it's sad.
That's
Here's a positive spin.
Yeah, let's do it. What do you got?
This made the town rally together.
And they thought, like, maybe we gotta stop being so violent with each other.
That didn't happen, but they certainly remember the murders.
Well, then they said, let's remember these murders
There
forever.
it is.
And I'm sure it's a lovely town.
Yeah, I've never been.
We'll have to go sometime.
Okay. We could watch the movie too.
Yeah, I'll just watch the movie. I'm
The
not
Town
gonna go
That Dreaded
there.
Sundown.
Yeah, we'll just watch the movie.
This week on BuzzFeed Unsolved, we take a look at the death of Vincent Van Gogh, long thought to be suicide, but as recent writings may suggest, may actually be murder.
Excuse me?
What? We're gonna cover a murder on this show?
No, but of a man who long thought to have taken his own life.
I mean, he was a bit eccentric and had a history of bodily harm, so maybe people assumed it was suicide, but there are some things in here that, at least for me, are fairly convincing that it may be something a little bit more sinister.
Well, I'm here for it.
What you know about Gogh?
What about, he's a Dutch guy, painted a lot, very dreamy, cut off his ear. He did that self-portrait,
Yeah, he did a selfie. All right, we're done here then,
Case
right?
closed.
Case closed. No, we got him. We got a murder to talk about, bud.
Okay.
All right, season finale. Let's do it, baby. Let's get into it.
Vincent Willem van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853, in Zundert, Netherlands. He was the oldest surviving child of Theodorus van Gogh and Anna Carbentus. Vincent would eventually have 5 younger siblings, the one he would form the closest relationship with being his brother Theo. Despite his good grades, Vincent left secondary school before graduating. At age 16, he began his art career as an apprentice with Goupil & C, an international art dealer where his uncle was a partner. Vincent first worked for Goupil in The Hague, then in London, and finally in Paris, where he was dismissed from the company in 1876, 2 days after his 23rd birthday.
Kind of a double-edged sword back then, because it's neat that you can just jump into an apprenticeship at age 16. Be like, yeah, I'm probably gonna be a legend in the art field. I'll do that.
You could still do that today, though. I feel like people start apprenticeships quite young.
But they don't really do, like at 16?
Yeah, I remember applying for an apprenticeship at Warner Bros. At 16.
How'd that turn out?
I didn't get it. So I hope you're watching this now and know what you missed out on.
Jack Warner.
Jack.
In 1881, after 5 years of wandering Europe and bouncing between dead-end jobs such as lay preacher, Vincent moved back in with his parents, who worried about their son's lack of direction in life. Theo, who had also gone to work for the art dealer Goupil & C but had risen through the ranks to become a manager, began sending his older jobless brother money. For the next few years, Vincent would move out for periods but return to his parents' home.
It's interesting because nowadays people, people get to age like 24 and they're like, I just don't want to know, I don't know what I want to be in life.
Well, it is kind of funny that he is this 19th century millennial, just wandering around.
Yeah.
Not really sure what his purpose is. And if Vincent Van, this is an aspirational tale for all you out there. If Vincent Van Gogh is going through this similar struggle, you can make something of yourself.
Just out there with his brush, saying, I'll put this on something. You put it in front of me, I'll put it to it.
I feel like you can word that better.
Yeah, no, it's probably exactly what he said to people. I'll put this on something.
Give me a job, I'll put this on something.
I'll put this on something, you put it in front of me, I'll put it to it.
In 1884, Vincent, now in his 30s, wanted to start paying Theo back for all the support he had given him over the years. Vincent began sending his paintings to Theo in Paris for him to sell. Unfortunately for all parties, Vincent's work was not what the people of Paris were looking for.
I always wondered about this when it comes to famous artists. Obviously, it took them usually decades to find what made them famous. Wouldn't you say that the paintings, like their early drafts of when they really sucked, wouldn't those be worth more because it's like seeing the journey?
I don't know if they're worth more, but they're probably worth a lot.
Like a year one Van Gogh.
Yeah.
I feel like that, when you say it that way, it sounds like it should be expensive.
It's a little, it did send a little, whew.
I didn't know he had a year one Van Gogh in his house. I didn't know he was doing that well.
That's pretty good.
It looks like shit, but
There's a lot of that out of there for old Picasso. He's got a lot of early stuff out there.
Oh, Pablo?
Yeah, him.
Oh, you're not talking the other Picasso.
Not Ted Picasso.
Over the next 5 years, Vincent's life would appear to once again be mired by folly, as he started a failed art collective and continued his nomadic habitation of Europe. During this period, however, the style now associated with Vincent began to take form. The tones used in his paintings began to lighten. He developed his characteristic style of using short brush strokes, and he moved to brighter, more colorful subjects, such as portraits, often self-portraits, and city scenes. Unfortunately for Vincent, the progress of his art happened during a time of declining mental health, culminating in late 1888 when Vincent famously severed his own ear and wrapped it up as a present for a sex worker. The day after this eerie occurrence.
You like that one?
Yeah, he liked it. I loved it too.
Cheers.
Vincent was admitted to the hospital, where he stayed until early 1889. For the next few months, Vincent struggled with his mental health, eventually checking himself into a psychiatric hospital in May. During his 1-year stay at the hospital, Vincent made some of his most famous masterpieces. In his first week there, he started painting the irises in the asylum's garden. While Vincent considered the paintings merely a study, Irises is considered one of his most iconic pieces. The Starry Night, now one of the most famous paintings in the world, depicts the view from a window in the asylum, enhanced by Vincent's imagination. In January of 1890, Theo and his wife welcomed their newborn son, Vincent Willem Van Gogh, into the world, named after the infant's uncle. Vincent sent them his famous painting, Almond Blossom, from the hospital as a gift for his new nephew. All told, while in the asylum, Vincent made about 150 paintings, and by 1890, his work was finally being exhibited and receiving positive reviews.
I don't know if I agree with this narrative all the time, where art needs to come from this like darker place of misery or maybe like turmoil within your head.
You don't need to be troubled to make good art.
It happens,
but
sure.
I think intense emotion or introspection can obviously fuel it.
Yeah, like a breakup or a death.
Yeah.
But it is weird that great art is often not appreciated when it comes out. And
That's
I don't
true.
know why that is.
I mean, a lot of it is, you know.
Well, maybe because like the artist's mind is more enhanced at that moment and the world is not ready for it yet, so they're ahead of the time.
That could be.
After being released from the mental hospital in May, Vincent moved to Auvers-sur-Oise, an area with other artists not far from Paris, which allowed for him to easily visit Theo's family in Paris. On one such visit in July, Theo told his brother he was considering starting his own business. This news greatly unsettled Vincent, who not only felt like a burden to his brother who was still supporting Vincent, but also worried about the impact of Theo taking this gamble on his own finances. After lunch on July 27, 1890, Vincent left the Ravoux Inn where he was staying in Auvers with his easel and painting supplies. It was a warm evening, so the innkeepers and guests were enjoying dinner outside after sunset when Vincent returned. He shuffled past without exchanging any words. He also notedly had none of the belongings he left with and had his jacket buttoned all the way up despite the heat. He clutched his abdomen and limped up the stairs to his room. Gustave Ravoux, the owner of the inn, went to check on Vincent. The artist was curled up in his bed, and when Gustave asked him what was the matter, Vincent replied, quote, "I wounded myself," end quote. He lifted his clothing to reveal a bullet hole under his ribs.
That's sad.
It is sad. One thing to note from this is it's a bit odd that he would take all of his painting supplies and his easel out only to then kill himself and then walk back with none of it. Like, why not just leave all that stuff in your apartment if that was what your plan was?
Who knows how these things creep up on a person?
That is true. Well, we're gonna get into it more in the theories.
Okay.
Theo arrived midday on the 28th to find Vincent in bed smoking. Vincent Van Gogh died just after midnight, cradled by his brother after telling him, quote, "I want to die like this," end quote. At just 37 years old, Vincent's life and career was over, leaving behind nearly 1,300 works of art on paper and more than 850 paintings. With no autopsy ever conducted, the exact location of the shooting never identified, and a 5-hour period between the time he left the inn and when he returned unaccounted for, it's time to dive into some theories. The first and prevailing theory is that Vincent was a troubled genius who shot himself in a wheat field. According to Adeline Ravoux, the then 13-year-old daughter of the inn owner Gustave, quote, "Vincent had gone toward the wheat field where he had painted before. During the afternoon, as my father understood it, Vincent shot himself and fainted. The coolness of the night revived him. On all fours, he looked for the gun to finish himself off, but he could not find it. Then Vincent got up and climbed down the hillside to return to our house," end quote.
Yeah, I could see that.
Oftentimes when people commit suicide, the weapon's right there, the means is right there, there's usually a note. It's very odd to be like, shoot myself, now let's go hide this gun.
Yeah. I mean, it's a wheat field, you know? I don't know how dense those are, but...
Unless he tossed the gun, which maybe he did.
At the same time, how thorough of a search do you think he's doing if he is currently bleeding out?
Well, you'll also come to find that no one else could find the gun either.
Interesting.
Now do you understand why I think that's so weird?
Now I understand, Ryan.
Perhaps no one was more adamant about this theory than Vincent himself. Witnesses recalled Vincent saying, quote, "I wounded myself in the fields. I shot myself with a revolver there," end quote. He was emphatic, saying, quote, "Do not accuse anyone. It is I who wanted to kill myself," end quote. Witnesses did say, however, that Vincent appeared confused as he lay dying, replying to the police's question of, "Did you intend to commit suicide?" with, quote, "I think so," end quote. Vincent had also in the past morbidly joked about suicide. He once told Theo he would, quote, "cease to be," end quote, if he ever felt that he had become a burden or nuisance to his brother. Could his fear of complicating his soon-to-be unemployed brother's life have driven him to kill himself one hot afternoon? While this story is the one Vincent seemingly wanted the world to hear, there are some glaring issues with it. For one, Vincent was shot in the abdomen below his ribs, which is an odd position to take if he had been aiming for his heart. Additionally, the fact that the bullet did not exit Vincent's body suggests there was some distance between Vincent and the gun, more distance than Vincent could have achieved on his own. It's also suspicious that Vincent allegedly dropped the gun so far out of reach that when he came to, he couldn't find it to finish the job. What's more, if he had actually passed out for hours after shooting himself, his wound would have been much bloodier than it was when he returned to the inn.
So if he did shoot himself, it would have been larger?
Yeah, because it had been so much time till when he got to the inn. It suggests that it happened sooner than he said it did, or like he washed himself.
Negating his theory that he fell asleep, woke back up, came to the inn.
It would have been so much bigger.
Yeah, so they're saying like he probably got shot right away, then walked to the inn.
Which would also explain then why he carried out his art supplies, because he didn't go, oh yeah, getting shots in the plans today.
Right.
So, it makes sense.
Okay.
Apart from the hard-to-explain ballistics, no one knows where Vincent would have obtained the gun. Revolvers were very rare in Auvers at the time, and no one would admit to selling or lending Vincent a gun. The next day, no one was able to find a gun where Vincent purportedly did the deed. All of Vincent's painting gear, too, seemed to have vanished.
All his painting gear?
Yes, from where he left it in the fields. So no gun, none of the paint stuff that he walked out with.
Yeah.
All the other stuff that I just mentioned.
Do you think someone was aware that this was Vinny's stuff and was like, I'll get a pretty penny for this?
I feel like we would have seen it by now.
I mean, frankly, people at BuzzFeed steal lunches out of the fridges all the time. You don't think someone was just like, hey, free stuff?
True, someone did steal some of the stuff from our set.
Yeah, we lose stuff from around here all the time.
From our precious props.
You think we don't notice that? Co-workers?
Timmy's ball is gone.
Yeah, this is fake.
This is a sham. This is a fake ball. This isn't Timmy's. Someone stole Timmy's ball.
What if Timmy came back and took it?
I thought about that, but I don't think so.
You did think about it.
In addition to the questions the physical evidence raises, Vincent was a religious man who condemned suicide, calling it wicked and a demonstration of moral cowardice. At one point prior to his death, he even said, quote, "I really did not think I am a man with such inclinations," end quote. Anytime he did have thoughts of suicide, it was always by way of drowning, saying, quote, "I can understand people drowning themselves," end quote.
Suicide is wrong. I do not understand it. It'd be pretty baller to drown.
It's just a weird thing to just tack on as a button at the end of that.
Yeah, because drowning arguably seems like the
more
maybe
painful.
Worst.
But why is it more morally sound?
I've heard that it is agony.
Oh God, did you really just sneak a prestige quote in there?
I don't know.
Theo also found no evidence that Vincent was planning on killing himself, finding no suicide note, but instead drafts of letters on his desk that he surely didn't want anyone to read. With so many loose ends in the suicide theory, it's time to look at another hypothesis, this one posited by biographers Stephen Nafa and Gregory White Smith. Nafa and Smith suggest Vincent was shot by some local boys, and that Vincent protected their identities. To begin, it's worth going back to get a better picture of what life was like for Vincent in Auvers. He was known to be quite eccentric, and when he would approach people in the street to ask if they would sit for him, most people retreated. His appearance didn't help matters, with wild hair, ratty clothes, and a missing ear. As is often the case, the worst bullies were the teenage boys. They would pretend to be nice to the artist to gain his trust, then pull pranks on him, like throwing salt in his coffee, rubbing chili pepper on a dry paintbrush Vincent tended to suck, and putting a snake in his box of painting supplies.
Why are these boys the way they are?
Sick pranks, dude.
The snake bit the artist.
We nailed him, bro, right? Yeah! Yeah! What a nerd.
God, I'd love to just transport them here and be like, hey, you know that guy who put a funny snake in his mailbox?
You know, you put some salt in his coffee?
He's in a museum.
He's the museum that you're standing in front of
He's the
now.
museum. I can't believe boys would be that mean to a funny old man.
I can believe it. Teenage boys are the worst.
I remember being obnoxious as a teen.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
If you're pranking a stranger, I find it not as funny.
It's just mean.
That's just mean.
It's just mean.
And this is mean.
One of the boys who would tease Vincent was Renee Secreta, who said, quote, "Our favorite game was making him angry, which was easy," end quote.
Our favorite game was making him angry, which was easy.
What a little stinker.
A little piece of shit. Oh, look how red his face is getting. Ho, 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 ho. Look at the tears. Oh my God, what a little brat. Oh, I love it.
Renee's older brother, Gaston, was an aspiring artist who liked to hear Vincent's tales of the Parisian art world. Vincent figured Renee was just something he had to endure in order to have a friendship with Gaston. Renee, unlike his brother, had no interest in art, instead enjoying fishing and hunting. After seeing Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in Paris, Renee came back to Auvers with a full outfit of Western clothes, complete with fringe coat, cowboy boots, and added a .380 caliber pistol. Vincent started calling Renee Buffalo Bill, a mispronunciation of Buffalo Bill due to his accent, which only angered the boy more.
I love it. I love
wars.
Vincent getting back at him. Because I'm sure this guy just showed up and Van Gogh was just like, oh, Buffalo Bill. And everyone was like, oh. I just said he's Buffalo Bill. And it was like,
Oh, he did it again. Vincent does it again.
and Renee's sitting there like, you shut up, shut up.
And they're all like, blow off those pistols, Vince. Oh, what a burn.
What?
I love that kid taking his hat off, slamming it on the ground, stomping on it.
So to hear him get a little win in there,
Yeah, a little prank war.
I love it.
That's good.
It makes me happy.
In their book, Van Gogh the Life, authors Nafa and Smith speculate that the Secreta boys quarreled with Vincent around a farmyard on Boucher Road. They may have accidentally fired the gun, striking Vincent in his abdomen. Vincent then stumbled back towards the inn where he covered for the boys. The boys, in shock at what they had done, may have collected Vincent's belongings and fled the scene, destroying what evidence might remain.
It seems plausible, one, because he's a sweet man.
Yes.
And clearly he put up with this bullying for a long time. So they're being very cruel to him, and he's still just kind of like, hey, that's just how it goes.
He had, he had a relationship with one of the brothers.
And that's the other thing. If he's close with Gaston, then maybe he doesn't want to point fingers to Renee.
Yeah, because it's going to ruin their life.
Yeah, it would be a devastating thing.
Yeah, I buy it. I think I could get behind this.
The theory is supported by the fact that multiple witnesses saw Vincent leave the inn and head towards the hamlet of Chapenval, and not towards the fields where he claimed he'd been painting. That road leads to a spot in Oise where Renee enjoyed fishing. It's possible Renee and his brother met Vincent on their way back from Oise, went to a nearby farmyard, and then the boys accidentally shot the artist. That would also make it easier for Vincent to get back to the inn with a bullet in his stomach, as opposed to a steep mile-long trek back from the wheat fields. This theory would explain a lot of things the suicide story does not, such as the odd entry point of the bullet, the lack of suicide note, why Vincent took his painting equipment to kill himself, why all that gear and the gun could not be found, and why he didn't shoot himself in the head.
They don't think that Renee would have been so upset about the cowboy clown.
About the Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, that he would.
I would hope not. See, that makes this story get a different kind of turn.
Yeah.
Still sweet of him to cover, but I really, really don't want to accept the fact that maybe Renee did shoot him on purpose.
In the wake of the shooting, Renee, Gaston, and their father left town. When they returned, Renee, who rarely traveled anywhere without his pistol, no longer had the gun. When asked about it decades later, Renee said Vincent stole it from him. In the 1930s, as Vincent's work was beginning to gain notoriety, townspeople told an art historian that young boys shot Vincent on accident, and that Vincent protected their identities for fear they'd be accused of murder. Still, largely due to Irving Stone's 1934 novelization of Vincent's life and death, and the 1956 movie that followed, the idea of Vincent Van Gogh being a tortured genius who took his own life crystallized in the public consciousness. In a story that may feel familiar for those of us in our 20s and 30s, Vincent spent much of his life looking for a purpose, trying to find a path that could at once fulfill himself while also bringing joy to others. What he didn't know at the time of his death was that his work would be beloved by generations, inspiring countless others to pursue their life's true purpose. What he did know at the time of his death was how that fateful bullet found a home inside his abdomen. But as for the rest of us, that truth will remain unsolved.
Well, that's a lovely little story. I gotta be honest, I didn't think that the alternative would be a little bit heartwarming.
Yeah, I would say so. It definitely paints a different image completely of him in my mind, because I, like most of the public, did think he was a tortured genius who took his own life.
Yeah.
But this paints him as a very empathetic, understanding man, the underlying theme being human kindness.
Yeah, not bad. It's a good thing to try. Take it for a whirl.
Yeah, it's definitely a good way to end the season.
Oh.
See, we don't agree on anything, but right now
we
we can
hate each
agree.
other.
We like this moment.
Yeah, it's
so
very fun.
you all take a cue from this, and we're all gonna be golden. This week on BuzzFeed Unsolved, we investigate the murder of Bugsy Siegel, the infamous mobster who helped launch the mega casinos that we associate with Las Vegas today.
That's me rolling the dice.
Oh, is that you rolling the dice at the craps table?
Yeah.
You know what's
Vegas guy.
Speaking of rolling the dice, we are taking a chance here by doing another mob episode.
Getting gutsy.
That's probably fine.
Yeah,
Right? They're all
yeah,
old. They're not gonna be able to do anything. Granted, doesn't really matter how old you are. Pulling a trigger is just as easy, but you know what? I don't need to sleep at night.
Pop!
Okay,
See?
Jesus.
That easy. Okay, let's do it.
All right.
Benjamin Siegel was born on February 28, 1906 in Brooklyn, New York. There, along with childhood friends Meyer Lansky and Morris Mo Sedway, Siegel began a criminal career extorting local street vendors in exchange for protection from other gangs in the area. Fellow gang members started calling him Bugsy, a slang term for crazy at the time, due to his violent temper. Allegedly, Bugsy was not a nickname that Siegel cared for, and those who knew him would never call him that to his face.
Now, this is something I find interesting about most mob nicknames. Almost all of them, this is the rule that applies.
You don't call them
You don't call them their nickname to their face,
Really?
but when talking about them, you use the nickname.
I guess I could see if someone were calling you Babyface.
Or Tiny.
Or Tiny. Who else was that? I'm trying to think of other popular...
That's embarrassing that those are the only two that come to mind. You know.
Well, look, I'm not embarrassed to not know much about the mob. Put them behind bars.
Eventually, Siegel, Sedway, and Lansky transitioned to other crimes like car theft, bootlegging, and gambling, rising through the ranks of New York's organized crime world. It's widely thought that Bugsy was one of the 4 men who in 1931 executed Joe Mazzaria at an Italian restaurant in New York, leading Lucky Luciano to take the throne as the chairman of the board of the American Mafia. In 1937, Lansky sent Bugsy and Mo to Los Angeles to build up the mob's presence on the West Coast. While the mob had been heavily involved in bootlegging during the 20s, by the time Siegel landed in California, the 21st Amendment had put a stop to money to be made on importing illegal hooch.
It feels like the West Coast is always painted as like this just like do-good coast. Like it's always like we got to take the crime syndicate over to the West Coast.
Put
like,
some over there.
We never started it over here.
Too much crime here. Let's put some over there.
It's just we could never start anything on our own over here.
Yeah.
We're too distracted by the sunshine.
Bugsy decided to focus on gambling. He invested in the SS Rex, a gambling ship that was docked 3 miles outside of Santa Monica to try and avoid California anti-gambling laws. While authorities eventually shut it down, Bugsy set his sights on Las Vegas. Nevada had legalized gambling, so there wouldn't be as many headaches trying to avoid police. In 1945, with money from the syndicate back east, Siegel took over a struggling construction project outside of Las Vegas's city limits, the Flamingo Hotel and Casino. At the time, Vegas was nothing like we think of today. The Flamingo would be the first luxury resort on the Strip. Siegel hosted the grand opening of the resort on December 26, 1946, while the project was still unfinished. Nevertheless, mega superstars like Judy Garland and Clark Gable were at the opening, foreshadowing Vegas's glamorous future. After this party, Siegel closed the resort to finish construction, and the mob back east became antsy.
I will say building a big, giant, expensive luxury resort in the middle of the desert, well,
Yeah.
you know what? It seems like a bit of a gamble. It's good.
It's really great. It's good stuff.
Bit of a gamble.
By this time, the project's cost had ballooned from Siegel's originally budgeted $1 million to up to $6 million, much of the overruns believed to be due to Siegel skimming from the top. If there's one thing to remember about the mob, it's that you don't steal from it. During a meeting of mob bigwigs in Cuba, an agreement was reached on the fate of Bugsy. If the Flamingo proved to be a success, he'd be able to make things right. Luckily for Bugsy, by May of 1947, the Flamingo had already made $250,000 in profit. Unluckily for Bugsy, that apparently wasn't enough.
$250,000 of profit? That's like a decent enterprise right there, I would say.
Not good enough for me.
Not enough for you to be stealing, probably.
Yeah, I would not be happy with him.
Yeah.
On June 20th, 1947, Siegel was sitting on a chintz sofa in the living room of his mistress Virginia Hill's home in Beverly Hills. At 10:45 p.m., from a rose-covered pergola just 14 feet from Bugsy, a .30 caliber military rifle fired at least 9 shots at the mobster. 4 rounds hit him, killing him instantly. Just moments later, 3 of Meyer Lansky's henchmen strolled into the Flamingo Hotel and declared the casino was now theirs. Despite his fame, coroners misspelled Siegel's name on his toe tag, and his funeral lasted a mere 5 minutes with only about 6 people in attendance.
I don't think that's a testament to how popular he was as much as it was a testament to maybe the mob's power.
Get him in the ground.
Well, it's like,
Don't show up.
well, also,
Don't go to that funeral.
Yeah, you know the mob whacked this person.
Yeah.
Maybe don't show up in support of him.
Yeah.
You don't want to add yourself to an ever-growing list.
If I get murdered, nobody come to my funeral.
Don't think you're gonna have to put that disclaimer out. It's gonna happen on its own.
Are you? That's unbelievable. Well, but now that I've put the disclaimer out,
Yeah.
that's the reason why.
There it is.
I don't want anyone at my funeral. You hear me?
According to Beverly Hills Police Chief Clinton H. Anderson, quote, "We spent many man-hours investigating the Siegel case and were convinced that he was killed by his own associates, but there was never sufficient evidence to pinpoint the identity of the assassin." End quote. With that, it's time to start looking at theories behind who murdered Bugsy Siegel.
Theory 1, the mob. See you next week.
Our first theory is Eddie Cannizzaro, aka the Catman. Cannizzaro was a former errand boy for Jack Dragna, who was once described in a report by the State Crime Commission as, quote, the Al Capone of California, end quote. Cannizzaro died in 1987 of heart failure, but before he passed on, he called a reporter and federal agents to his deathbed, where he confessed to 7 murders, including Siegel's. According to Cannizzaro's confession, quote, "It was a clean hit. I was picked because I knew Siegel and wouldn't make a mistake," end quote.
I don't know if a murder being personal necessarily makes you less likely to make a mistake, but I guess if he's on his deathbed, let him have the sentiment.
You may, in the sense that you know them better, you know maybe how they react, you know maybe where they...
But wouldn't that also like bring into emotion? What if you like remember, like you're about to do the hit, I have the scope right at your big head, and I'm thinking, we did have some good times on the road. Maybe I shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing.
But then
I got a job to do.
professionalism wins over.
My professionalism wins over, and
You pull that trigger.
and I Gallagher your head. Yeah. So, you know.
Jesus Christ.
Casting doubt on Cannizzaro's confession are a few inconsistencies in his story. Cannizzaro claimed he was questioned in connection with the murder at the time, but there's no record of an interview with him in the Bugsy case file. As well, Cannizzaro claimed that after the murder, he drove off in the direction of Wilshire Boulevard. A neighbor questioned after Bugsy was killed, however, told police that after the gunshots, a car was heard hurtling in the opposite direction towards Sunset Boulevard. At the time of his death, Cannizzaro was living with his mother and over 30 cats in the Agora Hills neighborhood of western LA County. He was hoping to create a birth control serum for cats and had asked some of his old pals in Las Vegas for funding.
Very funny that this man has 30 cats and is trying desperately to stop them breeding.
Yeah, maybe.
Like, I like to think he had 2 cats and then a year later had 30 cats and is like, I gotta shut this down.
Yeah, it's just, I don't feel like that's something you disclose to your mob buddies. Like you're tossing back beers and like, I got 30 cats working on a serum.
Yeah, everyone's probably like telling him crazy stories like, well, I got 30 cats. And everyone's like, He's like, I'm trying to.
Who brought the cat
I'm trying
man?
to stop him.
I'm trying to stop them from boning. It's controlling my mind. I got a serum. You want to try it?
I'm working on a serum.
Also, I hate that he calls it a serum. It makes me feel like he is doing some like
I'm working
garage
on
science.
A
with
special little juice that I inject into testicles.
Eddie, get out of the garage! Stop working on your damn serum!
Shut up, mother!
The second theory is a World War II vet, Robert McDonald. This theory comes from Warren Hull, an executive assistant in Nevada who said McDonald's role in Siegel's murder had been a family secret for decades. On his deathbed, Hull's father urged his son to research the story and get it out there. Hull obliged the dying man's request, going on to create a 400-slide PowerPoint presentation laying out the points of his case.
Yowza! Who's he showing that to?
Yeah, who is he showing that? I guess investigators, perhaps?
He's just inviting friends over for margaritas?
Yeah.
I got something I want to show you. It's crazy. It's gonna take about 4.5 hours.
Is this your trip to Niagara Falls? Hope you went to the bathroom because there's no breaks.
McDonald was married to Hull's mother's cousin and best friend, Betty Ann McDonald. Betty Ann's mother, Gaynell Rockwell, worked at City Hall in Los Angeles. There, she met Jack Dragna, the Al Capone of California from our previous theory. Gaynell told Dragna her daughter was having troubles with her husband, McDonald, who could be violent at times. McDonald also happened to owe the mob $30,000. Dragna went to McDonald, explaining his debts would be forgiven if he offed Siegel. According to Hull, McDonald's time in the military made him an expert marksman, including with the .30 caliber carbine, the alleged murder weapon. Again, however, the neighbor's report of a speeding car cast doubt on this theory. Hull thinks that McDonald, who lived just on the other side of a golf course from Virginia Hill, would have escaped on foot, sneaking back to his home less than a mile away in the dark.
He just lived on the other side of the hill. He'd sneak, through the dark covert, like on foot.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Unless.
He wanted to throw them off?
Yes. Why would I drive when I could just walk?
You really think he went that deep into it?
The old double bluff.
Just 3 months after Bugsy's murder, McDonald would go on to shoot himself and his wife, Betty Ann. Hull says there's no evidence that Beverly Hills police ever investigated McDonald as a suspect in Siegel's murder, despite the fact that McDonald allegedly used the same type of weapon to kill himself and his wife as he did on Siegel, less than a mile away and only 3 months after Bugsy's murder. Hull believes it's even possible that Howard Hughes may have pressured police not to investigate McDonald, as he had worked closely with the man's father.
Little Howard, yeah, little Howie.
A little Howie came in here.
How?
And most of these mob ones, I feel like it's like, maybe he did it behind the barn and buried him tossed his body in the river, whereas this one actually has things that link him to the crime, I feel like.
Tricky thing is the mob is good at covering their tracks.
That is true, that's what they're built on.
Yeah.
A third theory comes from Bee Sedway, the wife of Mo Sedway, Bugsy's childhood friend coming up in the mob. According to Bee, Mo had been sending casino numbers back to Meyer Lansky on the East Coast, including gambling winnings and, crucially, construction costs. Bugsy conducted a meeting in March of 1947 without Mo. There, he reportedly said he was looking to get rid of Mo, saying, quote, "I'll have Mo shot, chop his body up, and feed it to the Flamingo Hotel's kitchen garbage disposal," end quote.
I thought you were gonna say he was gonna feed him to the flamingos, and that would have been cool as hell.
One of the attendees told Mo, who called his wife and asked her to drive from LA to Vegas. The two then drove out into the desert and then walked even further to ensure a private conversation.
Walking into the desert to have a private conversation.
Well, because that's the only way you can ensure.
Oh, hey, I get it.
Also, not gonna lie, if you do have a death threat on your head, maybe not best to walk out to where no one could find you or see you.
Good point.
Let's pre-package ourselves for this murder. Make it real nice and easy. This will be real nice. They can't hear us at all.
Let's have a private conversation. You know what we ought to do? Dig a hole for ourselves.
They'll never find us down here.
6 feet down, I feel that'll be pretty good.
It'll be good, it'll be great.
When Mo told his wife of the threat against him, Bee immediately called Matthew Moose Panza, a crane operator and Bee's lover. Mo and Bee, who married when he was 41 and she just 17, had a very unconventional conventional marriage for the time. They were very honest with one another and knew about one another's extramarital companions. In fact, Mo had insisted that upon his death, Moose was to marry B. After their meeting, Moose arrived in Las Vegas to protect Mo. After the mob boss meeting in Cuba where cost overruns on the Flamingo were discussed, however, Lansky gave Mo his blessing to take matters into his own hands. Moose volunteered to do the job and spent weeks practicing his marksmanship.
I got a question about my boy Moose.
Yeah.
Is he a little guy?
Oh, because you think usually in the mob it's kind of like
Yeah. Like a big, tall, lanky guy like me would be a short stack or something.
they are a fan of oxymorons.
Yeah, I love people being like, oh, wait till Moose gets here. A big knock at the door. They open the door and a little.
Hey there. It's me. What's the problem here?
Mo's in trouble? Let me hop in the Moose mobile. Drives down.
According to B, after pulling the trigger, Moose hurried to the car and drove straight to Santa Monica, where he broke down the rifle, leaving the butt of the gun on a rooftop and throwing the barrel into the ocean. As his health was failing, B's son Robbie reached out to a reporter to tell his mother's story. When that reporter reached out to the Beverly Hills Police Department to check whether Moose had been considered a suspect, they replied, quote, "It's in the best interest of the city of Beverly Hills not to speak to you," end quote.
I love the fact that posh office could possibly be dirty.
Yeah. I think that's just how everything in California back then was just filthy.
Really though?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I guess Beverly Hills I always saw as a place that, like, I know a lot of LA was corrupt, but I just,
all of it. All of it.
So you go by the principle that the more glamorous, the more dirty, perhaps.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I could get behind that.
Yet another theory suggests the Chicago mob took down Bugsy with the help of Siegel's mistress, Virginia Hill. Hill had been considered a trusted mob courier, and according to author Andy Edmonds, the Chicago mob used Hill as a source of information on Bugsy's dealings. While Siegel was building the Flamingo, the Chicago mob was financing a competing resort, the Dunes, on the current site of the Bellagio. Siegel's murder also took place at Hill's home. Hill would have been able to inform an assassin about Siegel's habit of reading the paper in her living room at night, and Hill had conveniently skipped town for Paris that day. Hill eventually moved to Europe to avoid charges of tax evasion, where she died at the age of 49. Her death was deemed an overdose, but some have their suspicions that the mob was involved.
Chicago mob, they're
boy.
good at what they do.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna come to this. Shocker.
As someone who was born under the bean, let me tell you,
Yeah.
Chicago, we know what we're doing. It's
No.
interesting, a lot of mob movies, you look at Goodfellas, stuff like that, sure, all takes place East Coast, but you really want something done? Go to those boys in Chicago.
Man, I gotta say, in a shocking turn of events, Shane talked about Chicago again in an episode. Frankly, what an upset.
Oh, and the pizza.
As one expects with mob killings, there are plenty of other theories out there, mostly unsubstantiated. To this day, no one has ever been prosecuted in the death of Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. And while what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, what happened to the man who helped birth modern Vegas remains unsolved.
I know I've busted this out before, but this is very much a case of
Oh boy.
just gonna have to let it be a mystery.
There it is. It took us 3 episodes to get to that, and we've arrived.
Some things you'll just never uncover, and you just gotta, that's the way of the world.
If there's one where the evidence seems the most strong, I would say that it's the one that involves Mo, Moose, and Lansky.
And just love Moose.
Do love me some
Big Moose fan.
Big Moose fan. But either that or the Hill one also makes sense too.
Yeah.
But if I had to go with one, I would go with Moose.
All in on Moose.
Put in an all,
All
on
the
Moose
chips.
there. Slide them all in.
Is that good? Is that okay to end on? A nice Vegas reference.
Yeah, there you go.
See you next week.